Hi, this is John Firth, and I'm here with my good friend Larry Reines to talk about bridging the gap between CEOs and their organizations. And I welcome our viewers for the live event, as well as viewers of the video. This will be posted immediately thereafter, and occasionally I do rebroadcasts for anybody who wants to see it. So today's topic is going to address the reality that it's very hard, regardless of the size of the organization, to always know what's going on and to always be connected. And the connected part is really what we're going to talk about, which is what happens when somehow your organization is going off in one direction and you're going off on the other as a CEO, and you can't seem to bridge that gap. And as I said, you can be disconnected from a small organization, which is almost hard to believe, but it can happen. And feeling disconnected, or an organization feeling you're disconnected when you're 200,000 people, that's easier for that to happen, but there are also different rules on how to make sure that doesn't happen. So I want to have Larry introduce himself quickly for those of you who don't know him, and maybe he can give us an example of what he's seen in terms of a CEO being disconnected, in particular from a small company.
Larry Ryan, it's great. Thank you, John. It's great to see you all the time. I'm a partner founder of Aaron Meyer Consulting Group, and I help small and medium businesses with their challenges and opportunities. And I've been 30 years working in the footwear industry, dealing with owners and operators, CEOs who have acted like CEOs, and then owners who just are operators of their business. So the question John posed, so what happens when a CEO is not connected with their business? So when you're dealing with the smaller companies, let's say under $50 million, there's usually not a middle gap there. And it's how the owner slash CEO wants to operate their business. Some of them work from their hip. They have a core competency that they're using. And let's just say they're a great seller. So they're in the sales mode. And a lot of times they find themselves totally disconnected from the operations and from the finance section of the business. Right? There's no communication. All they are is sell, I'm getting it. And they have to be pulled in. So what happens is, it creates some friction. It creates, people have responsibility without authority sometimes in businesses that size. Mm-hmm. And they're tasked to work on something, but their leader is on a separate direction.
I think it's fascinating you bring up, the salesman as CEO. That's actually a very hard transition to make, I find, because at the end of the day, it is about revenue. Without revenue, you have no business or customers. But in fact, I worked for an organization that was driven like that. It was consulting, so it's easy for an owner-operator to be a salesman. And it was really tough. It was a very tough culture. And there was a point in my life where I was fine with it, although as I got older, I wasn't. But it was a very rough and tumble. Basically, you eat what you kill, and everybody were killers. And that was a difficult one. And I would say Roland managed the people well because he had a really good sense of people and how to connect with them. And he had a lot of energy to do that. So I think that was a saving grace. What about that transition from being an entrepreneur to a CEO, or that middle place where you're going from being a small organization, you're putting in infrastructure, you're putting in all sorts of processes. Where are the dangers there in terms of getting disconnected?
Well, it all starts with the transition of having to all of a sudden be in a leadership position in competencies that you're not familiar with. Right. So the sales CEO is certainly not familiar with what it takes to get the financing and the funding and what the reporting structure is.
And you make it says and take it seriously either. That's one of the things I see is they don't see the value of really dealing with an organization. People started with salespeople.
Exactly correct. And the same thing with the operations. They see things happen and they don't know why they don't happen, and they don't get into the nitty gritty. And most of the time, what the CEO needs to do is think about two experiences: the customer experience and what the customer perceives from the outside looking in, and then the employee experience of what they're experiencing as they're trying to serve both the customer and the CEO. It's almost a triangle of sorts. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I find that there is a little secret, right? So what you have to do is you have to take your team and you have to sort of get a commitment to the goals of what you're looking to do. You have to pull away from being in the business for a moment, work on the commitment. What are the goals of the company? Is everything well defined, right? Step 2, are we defining the goals? Are we defining your roles? Where are we on that? Do you have the knowledge to do this type of work, right? And what are we doing to give you what you need to get the job done?
You bring up a really good topic. I just wanted to quickly take a break and then show people how they can get in touch with you. I'll leave this up for the next 4 or 5 minutes before I put mine up. But again, we're talking about bridging the gap between CEOs and their organizations. And you bring up an interesting topic in terms of how you delegate and when you delegate. And what do you do when you have to, you're suddenly have a part of the organization, or you're engaged in activity, and I have several clients dealing with this right now, that you've never done before and you don't have any expertise. And I think the fears that the CEOs have are greater than the danger, the actual reality, which is there is a key core competency or skill set that I try to make sure my clients have, which is to ask questions. Mm-hmm. If you're a marketing, if you come out of marketing and sales and you don't really understand operations, you're going to have to ask your operations people a lot of questions, and not be afraid that you look stupid, you don't know what you're doing. Fact is, you're actually being authentic and you're making people feel like they're being heard. And that, of course, is one of the main things, is you don't get disconnected from an organization if the employees feel that you're actually listening. So I would put that as a principle for not getting disconnected from your company by asking questions, especially in functional areas that you have no expertise in or little experience.
Right. So, yeah, right. Exactly. So once you commit and you define, and then people know and understand, you have to have a commitment to open communication. Yeah. Right. So you have the basis of who's doing what, how they're doing it. Do they know how to do it? And then communicate. And that's really the cornerstone behind keeping connected with and bridging the gap between the leader or CEO and their team.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I said, for me, questions are one of the key communication tools, especially when you get into areas. I mean, I don't think anybody expects a CEO to know everything. It's physically impossible, for one. I mean, it's biologically impossible. For another is things move so quickly. And I think there's also a mindset here. When I was at Sony, I can say this because it was 15 years ago, the CEO who hired me was very quickly getting disconnected from the organization. Now, Sony, it was a difficult time anyhow. They had sort of, the Walkman days were over. And he actually would talk about seeing if he could lift himself up off of his corporate headquarters so that he had the freedom to go out and, I don't know, be the face of the company. Well, that was already a bit of a mindset problem, because as he was doing that and the company was having difficulties, he stopped listening to people and actually stopped doing what he was told. He'd have experts, communication experts and what have you, for speeches and this, that, and the other. And I would hear people coming back from videotapings that he did completely frustrated because he didn't use the script they had written. He went off topic and it just was not professional. So you gotta listen to people that you hire who you have there to do specific things. I mean, President Trump's is in so much legal trouble because evidently, I mean, I don't know him, he doesn't listen to his lawyers and he does what he wants to do. And that's just impossible when you're in a very senior position and very important role as he is. But again, CEO of Sony, when I was working there, he fell on his sword. He began thinking he knew better, and just the whole organization at the end of the day. I mean, he was asked to resign, I think, because of that.
Right. So I've never been with the larger companies. So when I've been with the smaller companies, some of the if I could just share some of the solutions, sure, right? Yeah. So when you're with a 50 million and under company, I was always taught you walk the floor. It's sort of like as a retailer or just as a business owner, you want to see what is happening. And there's no way to get the pulse better than walking the floor of your business. If it's a retail store, it's super easy. If it's a wholesale business, it's a little more difficult, but you have a staff around you. And I know with hybrid now it's a lot more difficult, but you need,
or not even hybrid, but telecommunication,
yeah.
not being present physically.
Agreed. And I think actually I read a study today about that, which is people are starting to do the whole water cooler effect. We're beginning to miss out on some of that transfer of knowledge.
Oh, yeah.
Really interesting, but that's not our conversation today. Today we're talking about how do you get the CEO involved, and it's walking the floor of your business, speaking to the people. When I was a C-level executive of a company, I would walk the warehouse floor and find out what was happening there.
Yeah.
You can't imagine how much you can find out from speaking to every single person in the organization about something that can be fixed, something that can be done better, and what people feel about it, and how the tenor and the tone and the culture is. And the more you're there with the people, the better your culture becomes because they feel included.
Great. I'm going to take a pause again. I'm going to put my contact information up here in case somebody wants to get in touch. You can also email me if you have any questions, as you can with Larry. And this is Bridging the Gap Between CEOs and Their Organizations. And I'm here with my friend Larry Reines. And we're bringing up the question now of walking the floor. So we don't have a lot of floors left in some companies. People have even given up their offices. It's virtual. There's still obviously a lot of product companies where there are warehouses where people really do have to be there, literally. But how would you translate walking the floor and doing the water cooler thing to the virtual world, the telecommuting world, the remote world? Any suggestions? I was thinking, I think something like Slack or just IM is one way you can maybe simulate a water cooler. So have a little chat room where people can go if they just need to take a break, and which is why you usually walk first you have to go somewhere. That's one reason why you obviously walk the floor. Another one is just to take a break and think about things. And the third one is to actively show that you're engaged. Yeah, no.
So I think it has to be also video. You can't just do the texting. You need to have the free flow of information. If information is not free flowing, and I think some of the bigger corporations are setting up rooms or rooms where you can go and arbitrarily walk into the water cooler. I know that someone I know is in a major corporation. It's foreign owned, and they force the issue. I don't know if it's an algorithm that chooses people, but they just throw you into a room at a predetermined time, and then you do your networking and you do your conversations there where you're meeting people. I don't know if it's as creative, but it's something that's meaningful.
I think it could be very creative. I mean, I can imagine even hosted chat rooms where, because the power of the water cooler effect is not that your team is always together around the water cooler, is that you meet people from other teams you may not even know exist, and start getting an idea of what else is going on in the organization, breeds new interesting ideas, possibly creativity, and also, as you said, enhances communication.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think it was MIT Sloan, one of the professors at the School of Economics, I think the last name was Akers, did a study of Silicon Valley and specifically, and what happened when there was, when they lost the water cooler effect and that type of, and the amount of patents that were applied for, because that is a Silicon Valley thing, dropped significantly when you didn't have peer-to-peer interactions, in-person peer-to-peer interactions, and the amount of creativity dropped a large percent, enough to make it meaningful. So maybe when Elon Musk, I saw in today's paper, said, everyone come on back to work, it's not to be a meanie. It's not to interfere with people's life. It's to say, wait a minute, we can be greater as a group together with seeing each other just then apart. And maybe there is a better formula. Maybe it's 2 days, 3 days. There has to be something where we can keep the creativity and we can keep the innovation moving with face-to-face meetings.
Yeah, I think there was a study actually several years ago, and I hope I get this right, that basically said the same thing, which is because remote working, telecommunicating is almost as old as we are. I mean, it's been around for a while, for a long time, just the telephone. But working mothers often had the option of staying home the bulk of their working time so they could be with their children when they're babies and so forth. And it was Melissa Meyer, I think, who reversed the Yahoo telecommuting policy, which was pretty liberal in terms of not having to come to the office, brought them to the office, but that didn't do the trick. And I'm trying to remember, was it the loss of creativity, loss of productivity? There was something that happened. I think it's productivity. You're more productive when you're by yourself in your room, still interfacing with people electronically. You can get a lot more done because you don't have the interruptions, but the creativity goes down. And what happened was she brought people back and suddenly the productivity plummeted, if I remember correctly. And so they were missing goals and so forth because people were spending, more time than she expected around the water cooler and so forth.
Well, and there's interruptions too, right? There's the incidental interruption. It works both ways. It's harder to focus with more people around, which is why some form of hybrid sort of works.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the CEO. By the way, I'll use the chance now to also put your information back on. I think there are other solutions too. I think we have to remember CEOs of large organizations, also some small companies, also have boards. And so there's just as much danger of getting disconnected from your board, in some cases more danger, which can have harrowing effects if you lose the confidence of the board. And that often is the difference between saying something that they either don't get or disagree with and just keeping your mouth shut. Sort of the opposite almost. Sometimes with the board, less is more in terms of communication. But what have you seen, especially in smaller companies?
No, I don't think less communication is more in smaller companies. I think you need the face-to-face. You need that. You need the immediate interaction.
No, I'm talking with the board. When you're talking with advisors, upward.
Sorry. They're usually VCs, and there are people that are intermittently involved. So less is definitely more. They're not in the day-to-day, and the workers are commonly, if you're not the owner itself or on the C level, you're not having an interaction with the boards. And
right.
It's just not. It's not a thing. You don't even know it's there. And you don't want. You just sort of
and you don't want to know sometimes.
You don't. It's
employees don't know really. The dynamic with the board is almost directly the opposite of your interaction with employees.
Yeah, exactly.
But we have to remember that it can be the board that determines whether or not they think you've lost your organization. And usually it's in missed numbers, bad communication with them. In other words, getting into areas that are not germane to the basic strategic question of building this company. It can be a personality conflict. And they're often the ones that will determine, and I'm not saying they're always right, that there's a gap between the CEO and the organization. And usually it's for non-performance. Have you had clients that have had that issue where the board suddenly decides that person is no longer fit to run the organization?
Yes. I'm actually, there's something happening similar today with one of my clients where there's a no confidence vote, and they're dealing with that now, and they don't know what to do.
And how did that occur? I mean, from your viewpoint,
it's the numbers. It's exactly what you said, because when the investors and the boards that come out, I don't think they care about the nitty gritty. In the smaller size companies, they care about the numbers and the growth that you promise them, and and if you haven't been hitting it, and if your EBITDA is not hitting its EBIT numbers, you're sorry.
And that again is a form of communication. If you say one thing and something else happens, depending on the size of what it is. I mean, if you promise a 30% growth and you only get 5%, then what you said was obviously invalidated, unless you have a really, really good. These days, you might actually be able to tell a story without any ramifications.
I think in this case, the gross margin was more of the issue, right? Because the gross margin determines more your profitability go forward. Even if you miss your numbers, if your gross margin's far off, it's like you really made a mistake.
Well, there's the 40 rule, which is that it's a combination of your growth rate and your EBITDA. If it needs to be over 40 to be considered a healthy company by the investment community.
Right.
So you may not grow much, but or you may be growing a lot, 40% or 50%, but it's because you're reinvesting constantly, and your EBITDA may show that. Or conversely, you may be very conservative, keep the growth at a 10%, but you've got whopping margins. And then, then the board has to decide whether or not there's a different way of doing this. Do they want you to grow more? Do they want you to save money depending on economic cycles, cash in the bank, and so forth? But, the danger with boards are if they get whiff of something and they hear it wrong, this is why you don't want them talking to employees and vice versa, is they'll pick up on something that they hear and decide that, this is a danger zone, and when it's not. And then to have to correct a misperception is a nightmare. I mean, I went through it.
Yeah, no, I don't. I'm missing that middle part because again, the smaller companies under 100 million just don't have investors walking in the business.
Yeah. Oh, I'm talking also just regular advisor.
Yeah. Again, it's possible. I should say you're right.
Yeah. So, what do you do? How do you handle? By the way, I'll put my name back up. We're coming down to the final stretches of bridging the gap between CEOs and organizations. Without the middle, as a buffer, what are some of the danger zones there of CEOs, if not getting disconnected from their organizations, but maybe staying too connected too long? So one of the things that I know you talk about a lot with your people, and I know I do, which is when do you let go of certain things? When do you let go of a function, say that you were particularly skilled at, sales being one of the obvious ones? If you're a good salesman, you're going to want to be in charge of sales, but at some point you have to let go because you've got to pay attention to operations and so forth. What I find is that timing of when you let certain things go is highly dependent on how the organization develops and what you're trying to achieve and where your holes might be in terms of weak links in the organization. What have you found?
Exactly that is, where's your strategy? What's your North Star? Are you on track to your North Star? If you are on track, then letting go becomes a natural thing. If you're not, you have to figure out, wait a minute, am I working below my pay grade? What am I doing every day that's stopping me from doing the things to hit my North Star, to go in the direction I need to go? Mm-hmm. Really, it's almost that simple. If you're an owner operator and you have to find out what you have to let go on the operations side to be an owner / leader. And if you're an owner, then you shouldn't be doing any below your pay grade things. And I don't mean that in a condescending way at all. I mean, it is what's your priority task that you're doing to drive your business forward.
Yeah. And there's where we come up against a fear of losing your organization. I think that's the number one fear when you've got a CEO who you're pushing to start letting go of certain things, not to be involved in every meeting and to be out in the world, being the face of the company, whatever that might mean in terms of the business you're in. There is a fear among many CEOs of losing that special family culture that everybody thinks is so important. It's going to happen, but you got to replace it with something.
No, and it's the big deal. It's a delegation, right? What can you delegate out that is not serving the greater good? And the greater good is you call it removing, but it's letting go. But it's allowing other people to come in and thrive, right? You have to let other people come in and grow in your place because you did it once, and now someone else needs to do it. And you need to be able to manage that instead of do that. Right.
And that managing part is very key. I mean, some people like to think leadership does not equal management. You shouldn't be a manager, you should be a leader. I think in some people's brains that's misconstrued, and they let go very fast. I had a client who let go of his company very fast. In fact, they were in different cities. They were up near Boston. He was living in New York City. He couldn't even tell me basic financial information. In fact, they hadn't put somebody in place to actually be able to track that. And of course, that is danger, danger, danger. If a CEO can't readily get financial information of how his company's doing, quite frankly, I don't know how you're even going to be able to make anything happen, because you never know if it's working or not. But because he ran into financial difficulty and had to go out and find investors, he quickly reversed course and got very much into the weeds. But thank God, actually, this is where his propensity to let go, maybe too fast, was good, because he got into the weeds, but he also understood then when to get out of the weeds when he had fixed something or was on top of it again. And I think dashboards help a lot with that. Is if you have a good dashboard, it's easier to let go, because you at least have something in front of you that tells you whether or not you're in the, like a map. You have a map that you're following, and if you veer off course, having a good dashboard allows you to look, find it out and correct it.
I always called it back in the day, before it was a dashboard, it was a flash report.
Flash report. And there was another word for it. Can't think of it right now. So in closing, what would be maybe some of the principles to summarize that you think CEOs should watch for, so they don't get either shut out from daily communication, lose track of what's happening from an organization, accidentally piss people off, or literally just lose that personal connection that is so vital to getting things done and for motivating people?
So it's 4 or 5 things, like a commitment to the goals, right? Is everyone committed? You have to communicate the commitment. You have to define what people's roles are, right? You have to make sure that everyone knows and understands those 2 things. And then you have to do the open communication. And what I do with my clients is DISC reports, by the way. I didn't mention that before, but using a report so that you know how people communicate, so that you can communicate the way they hear, not the way you want to say it.
Yeah.
And if you can get those foundational principles down, I think you're avoiding the danger of disconnecting.
Yeah, I agree, and I would add 2 or 3 others. One is, don't forget the importance of the importance of core values. A lot of, especially founders and owners, literally sometimes forget to do the core value exercise, or don't know how important it is. And that really, if you begin living those core values as the CEO, and they're consistent from what you expect from the employees, that's a great way to be living or to be part of the organization, because there's nothing worse than when your CEO says one thing and does another. Let's just say you have it. You usually have some of the obvious ones: being accountable, teamwork, personal initiative, integrity. But if you have one, say, for example, Amazon has one that's very much about, watch every single penny you spend. Well, if the CEO is profligate and has yachts and spending money, and yet he's insisting that his team be very, miserly or thrifty, that would be going against the culture. And there's nothing worse than if you've really defined a culture explicitly and the CEO is going against it. The other thing I would add is one of the greatest tools that a CEO has is asking questions, great questions, as John Maxwell says, because that first of all makes it, you are, but it reinforces the fact that you're listening and you care about what the employees say, that you may actually take what they've told you and use it, and they'll see it having been used, and that's a great feeling of pride. But it is also a way to really figure out what's going on in the organization. Through body language, through the words they choose. It's very clear to me when I see a CEO talking to a member of a staff direct report, or maybe not even that, and you can just tell from the body language they're turning away from each other, like they can't wait to get out of the conversation. Bad.
No, it is. Questions are brilliant. You need to ask questions. You're right. It's a big one.
Brilliant questions are brilliant. They got to be good. Anyways, thank you, Larry, as always. I think we said some very interesting things. And thank you, those who listened. And again, feel free to get in touch with myself at the information here or with Larry should you have any questions or want to talk about what we just discussed.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Larry.